Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. Sarah, if I told you that I wanted to be more feminine, would you think I was crazy? The words tumbled out of me, clumsy and coated in the cheap whiskey I'd been nursing for the last hour. They hung in the air between us, shimmering and fragile under the muted purple lights of the bar. The bass from the speakers vibrated through the sticky countertop, up my elbows and into my chest, a dull thud that seemed to count down the seconds of my life about to be irrevocably changed. My best friend, Sarah Sharp, witty and devastatingly perceptive, turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable. She had been mid-sip of her gin and tonic, but she set the glass down with a deliberate click. Surprise flickered in her dark eyes, but not judgment, not disgust. It was the absence of those things that made my throat tighten. I rushed to fill the silence, my voice a low, shaky rasp. I don't know what I mean. I stared into the amber depths of my glass, at the single melting ice cube. It's this feeling, this ache. I see a woman walk down the street, the way her dress moves, the sound of her heels on the pavement, and I feel this jealousy. It's so sharp it hurts. I want to wear a skirt. Sarah, I want to paint my nails and wear earrings, not to be a joke, not for a dare, but because I think it might feel like breathing. It was the most honest I had ever been, the secret I'd buried for 28 years, packed down with layers of forced masculinity, athletic bravado, and a string of girlfriends I'd tried so hard to love, was finally clawing its way into the light. I felt naked, exposed, like my skin had been peeled back under the dim, forgiving lights of a place where no one knew my name. I braced myself for the laugh, the awkward pat on the back, the inevitable, "You're just drunk, Joe." Instead, Sarah reached across the bar and laid her hand gently over mine. Her fingers were cool and steady. When she spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Joe, you're not crazy," she said, her gaze holding mine, refusing to let me look away. "You just want to breathe properly." A strangled sound, half sob, half laugh, escaped my lips. A single tear I didn't even know was there broke free and traced a hot path down my cheek. The relief was a physical thing, a crushing weight lifting from my sternum. For years, I had imagined this confession. In my nightmares, it was met with derision. In my daydreams, it was met with confusion. Never, not once, had I allowed myself to hope for this quiet, unwavering acceptance. Sarah listened. She didn't interrupt as the floodgates opened, and I poured out decades of hidden yearning. I told her about the stolen moments in my teenage bedroom, trying on my sister's clothes, my heart hammering with a terrifying cocktail of fear and exhilaration. I told her about the profound sense of rightness I felt, a feeling that was always immediately suffocated by a tidal wave of shame. I told her how exhausting it was to be Joe, the reliable guy, the sports fan, the one who was always supposed to have it together. I was a performance artist, and my life was my longest, most grueling act. When I finally fell silent, voice raw and spirit spent, she gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "I have a proposition for you," she said, her tone shifting from gentle comfort to practical warmth. "No pressure at all, but if you want to try it, we can, just for a day, my place, completely safe. No one has to know. We can get you clothes, makeup, whatever you want. A test run. You just have to say yes." Her offer was a lifeline thrown into the turbulent sea of my confusion. The whiskey in my veins buzzed, making the world feel soft and malleable, making possibilities feel less like terrifying cliffs and more like gentle slopes. In the haze of alcohol and raw emotion, it felt simple, it felt possible. "Okay," I whispered, the word barely audible over the music. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Sarah's face. It was like watching the sunrise. "Okay," she repeated, a promise hanging in that single word. A strange, unfamiliar tendril of hope unfurled in my gut. It was terrifying, and it was wonderful. I woke to a familiar, skull-splitting throb behind my eyes. The morning light, a merciless white glare, sliced through the gap in my blinds. My mouth tasted like stale whiskey and regret. I rolled over with a groan, my body feeling heavy and foreign, and fumbled for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a single, devastating text message. It was from Sarah. "Still want to do what you talked about yesterday." My stomach clenched into a tight, icy knot. It all came rushing back, not in a coherent memory, but in disjointed flashes of intense emotion. The burn of the whiskey, the shame-laced relief of my confession, the terrifying, exhilarating weight of Sarah's hand on mine. I had said it. I had actually said it all out loud. A cold sweat broke out across my back. What had I done? I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could rewind time, unsay the words, shove the secret back into its dark, lonely box. It was one thing to feel it, to harbor it in the silent corners of my mind. It was another thing entirely to give it a voice, to let someone else in, especially Sarah. Our friendship was the most stable thing in my life. The thought of twisting it into something she couldn't understand, of making her see me as some kind of freak, was unbearable. Before I could spiral further into my panic, my doorbell rang. A sharp, insistent buzz that seemed to echo the frantic pounding of my own heart. I knew it was her. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants and a crumpled t-shirt, my hands shaking slightly as I stumbled to the door. She was standing there, holding 2 large coffees, a cheerful paper bag nestled in the crook of her arm. She wore a soft, oversized sweater and a smile that was so disarmingly gentle it made my carefully constructed walls of morning-after panic begin to crumble. "Brought breakfast," she said, breezing past me into the kitchen as if nothing monumental had happened. "And caffeine. Figured you'd need it." I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed tightly over my chest, a defensive posture. "Sarah, about last night." She turned from my counter, where she was unpacking pastries, and looked at me. Her expression was calm, her eyes clear. "It's okay to be scared, Joe. It's also okay to be honest." She pushed a coffee and a croissant across the counter towards me. "You said something beautiful last night. You said you wanted to breathe. Don't take that back because you're hungover and panicking." My face flushed with a heat that had nothing to do with the hangover. My hands were twisting the hem of my shirt, a nervous habit I thought I'd outgrown in middle school. An internal war was raging inside me. One part of me, the part that had been in control my whole life, was screaming to laugh it off, to blame the whiskey, to apologize for being weird and move on. Say it was a joke. Say you were just messing around. But another part, a smaller, quieter voice that I had suppressed for years, was whispering something else. It was the voice that had spoken last night. It was the voice that felt a thrill, not just terror. At her offer, it was a voice filled with a desperate, aching curiosity. What if she's right? What if this is your one chance? I don't know, I stammered, looking at my feet, at the floor, anywhere but at her. "It's crazy. People will think I'm—" "Who cares what people think?" she cut in, her tone firm but not unkind. "This isn't for people. This is for you, one day." I promised it would be safe, and I meant it. No pressure, no judgment. If you hate it, we'll throw everything out, have a beer, and never speak of it again. But if you don't, well, you'll never know unless you try. She let the silence hang in the air, a space for me to make my choice. I looked at her, at my best friend, who wasn't laughing at me, who wasn't disgusted, who was offering me a key to a door I had been too terrified to even approach. The fear was still there, a cold, heavy weight in my gut, but for the first time, the hope was slightly heavier. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind you take before you dive into cold water. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "but just for today." The brilliant smile from last night returned, lighting up her whole face. "Then let's get started." The first stop on our clandestine journey was a small, chic salon tucked away on a quiet side street. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful welcome, a sound that felt entirely at odds with the frantic drumming in my chest. A woman with vibrant pink hair and a warm, gap-toothed smile greeted us. "Sarah, so good to see you, and this must be your friend," she said, her eyes landing on me. Her name was Maria. She looked me over, not with scrutiny, but with a friendly, professional curiosity. I felt my shoulders tense up, ready for the inevitable question, the confused look. "Maria, this is Joe," Sarah said smoothly, "and he's putting himself completely in your hands today. We're looking for something softer, a little more movement. Think less guy next door and more androgynous chic." I just nodded dumbly, my throat too dry to speak. Maria simply smiled. I love a good project. Come on back. Have a seat." The sensation of the vinyl cape being fastened around my neck felt strangely ceremonial. I stared at my reflection in the vast, brightly lit mirror. I saw Joe, tired, scared, unshaven Joe, with a haircut he'd gotten at a sports-themed barbershop for the last 10 years. Maria's hands were surprisingly gentle as she led me to the washing station. Leaning my head back into the basin, I closed my eyes. The feeling of the warm water soaking my scalp, of her fingers massaging in the shampoo, was unexpectedly intimate. It was a kind of gentle, focused touch I wasn't used to. Men shake hands. They pat each other on the back. This was different. My face grew warm. A blush creeping up my neck, I realized, with a jolt, that I liked it. I liked it a lot. Back in the chair, Maria began to work, her scissors snipping with a quiet, confident rhythm. She didn't chop or buzz. She feathered and layered, coaxing my boring, blocky haircut into something with shape and life. She chatted with Sarah, their conversation alight, easy melody in the background, a comforting noise that allowed me to retreat into my own head. With every lock of hair that fell to the floor, I felt a piece of the old heavy armor fall away with it. When she started adding subtle, honey-toned highlights, a process that involved foil and a strange-smelling paste, my anxiety began to morph into a fluttering, nervous excitement. Finally, she put down her tools and picked up a hairdryer. The hot air, the pull of the round brush, the final spritz of some sweet-smelling spray was all a prelude to the moment of truth. "Okay," Maria said, spinning the chair around to face the mirror. "What do you think?" I opened my eyes. For a moment, I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. It was still my face, my eyes, my nose, my mouth, but it was different. The haircut framed my face instead of sitting on top of it. The subtle highlights caught the light, giving my dull brown hair depth and softness. It made my jawline seem less severe, my eyes somehow larger. It wasn't a man's haircut, it wasn't a woman's haircut, it was just mine. Is this me?" I whispered, my voice thick with awe. I reached up and touched a strand of hair that now fell softly across my forehead. It felt silky, alive. Sarah was standing behind me, her reflection smiling in the mirror. "It is, Joe, it really is." And in that reflection, for the first time, I saw a flicker of someone else, someone new. Our next stop was a boutique with a curated collection of clothes that were stylish without being overly trendy. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit by a wave of sensory overload. The scent of lavender and cedar, the soft lighting, the rainbow of fabric silks, cottons, linens. It was a world away from the sterile, functional men's departments I was used to. I felt clumsy, out of place, like a bull in a china shop. I hovered awkwardly near the entrance while Sarah browsed with an expert's eye, her fingers dancing over the racks. I instinctively kept my hands in my pockets, terrified of touching something, of being discovered as an imposter. Sarah returned with an armful of clothes. "Okay, no overthinking," she commanded gently. "We're just trying things, seeing what feels right." She held up a simple A-line dress in a stunning shade of jade green. It was made of a soft, flowing fabric. "Let's start with this." My heart did a painful lurch. A dress. An actual dress. She was handing it to me. I can't," I stammered. "Yes, you can," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. She nudged me towards the fitting rooms. "Go on, I'll be right out here." Inside the curtained-off cubicle, I stared at the dress hanging from the hook on the door. It looked so foreign, so feminine. It felt like a sacred object I had no right to touch. My hands were shaking as I took off my jeans and t-shirt, folding them into a neat masculine pile, a relic of a life I had lived just an hour ago. Stripped down to my boxers, I took the dress from the hanger. The fabric was cool and impossibly soft against my fingertips. I took a deep breath and pulled it over my head. The sensation was electric. The fabric slithered down my torso, over my flat chest and narrow hips. There was no resistance, no constriction of denim or stiff cotton. It just flowed. It skimmed my skin, a gentle, whispering caress. The hemline settled just above my knees, exposing my pale, hairy legs. I felt a surge of shame, of wrongness, but underneath it, something else was stirring, a feeling of lightness, of freedom. The dress didn't just hang on me, it moved with me. I shifted my weight, and the fabric swirled around my legs. I turned, and it followed. It made my body feel different. It wasn't about being male or female, it was about the physical experience, the gentle weight, the soft texture, the way it redefined the space my body occupied. I whispered to myself, a silent, awestruck question, why does this feel so right? A soft knock came at the curtain. Joe, can I see? My breath hitched. My instinct was to yell no, to tear the dress off and hide, but the whisper of curiosity was louder. With a trembling hand, I pulled the curtain back just an inch. Sarah's face appeared in the gap. Her eyes widened, not with shock, but with genuine appreciation. Oh, Joe, she breathed, that color is perfect on you. She wasn't looking at a man in a dress. She was looking at me, and she was seeing something beautiful. The compliment landed in my chest like a warm stone. My face burned, a blush so intense it reached the tips of my ears. She pushed the curtain aside fully. I stood there, awkward and exposed, in a jade green dress and my gray boxer briefs peeking out from underneath, but the shame was receding, replaced by a fragile, budding confidence. Sarah's simple, sincere validation was like water on a parched seed. In that fitting room, something inside me started to grow. From the boutique, Sarah took me to a department store cosmetics counter. This was, by far, the most intimidating environment yet. It was a brightly lit landscape of glass, mirrors, and impossibly beautiful women. I felt like a spy deep in enemy territory. Sarah led me to a counter where a woman named Tanya was working. Tanya had kind eyes and a flawlessly blended eyeshadow that looked like a sunset. Tanya, we need your magic, Sarah announced. My friend is new to all this and wants a very natural, subtle look, just enough to even things out and enhance what's already there. Tanya smiled at me, a warm, professional smile that put me slightly at ease. Of course, have a seat. Climbing onto the high stool felt like ascending a stage. I was under the bright lights, my face exposed for all to see. Tanya began by cleansing my face. Her fingers light and deft, the cool feel of the lotion, the soft cotton pads, it was another one of those unexpectedly pleasant, intimate sensations. You have great skin, she murmured, more to herself than to me, and really good bone structure. No one had ever said that to me before. I felt that familiar heat creep up my neck again. She started with a lightweight foundation, dabbing it on with a damp sponge. The sensation was bizarre. A cool, gentle tapping that slowly erased the redness in my cheeks, the faint shadows under my eyes, with each pat of the sponge. The face in the mirror became smoother, softer. It was still my face, but it was a more polished, idealized version of it. She filled in my brows ever so slightly, brushed a neutral, shimmery shadow on my eyelids, and added a single, delicate coat of mascara. The tiny wand tickling my eyelashes made me blink uncontrollably, and we both laughed. It was a small, normal moment that chipped away at my mountain of anxiety. The final touch was the lips. She chose a sheer, rosy pink gloss as she painted it onto my mouth with a small brush. I held my breath. I felt the cool, slightly sticky texture, and I watched in the mirror as my lips transformed. They looked fuller, softer, with a healthy, natural-looking shine. I instinctively pressed them together, and the sensation was entirely new. It was a heightened awareness of a part of my own body I had never paid much attention to. When she was finished, she handed me a small mirror. Just something simple and fresh, she said. I took the mirror. The face looking back was a revelation. It wasn't a mask. It wasn't a disguise. It was me, but refined. The subtle changes had softened my features, highlighting my eyes and balancing my face in a way I couldn't have imagined. It was a face that matched the feeling I'd had when I put on the dress, the feeling that started with the new haircut. It was a face that felt closer to me. You're beautiful, Joe, truly, Sarah said softly from beside me. I lowered the mirror, my heart doing a complicated, fluttering dance in my chest. A deep, seismic shift was happening within me. The shame that had been my constant companion for so long was being crowded out by a new, bewildering emotion, self-acceptance. I looked at my reflection in the big mirror behind the counter. at this person with the soft hair and the bright eyes and the rosy lips, and I didn't feel like a freak. I felt pretty, and the world didn't end. Our last stop was a nail salon. The air was thick with the chemical-sweet smell of acetone and polish. It felt like the final, definitive step, a detail so small and yet so overtly feminine. I sat awkwardly at a small table across from a young woman who introduced herself as Kim. I stared at the wall of polishes, a dizzying array of every color imaginable. It was overwhelming. "What do you think?" Sarah asked, sensing my paralysis. "Maybe something discreet to start." I pointed a slightly trembling finger at a bottle of pale, milky pink. It looked quiet and unassuming, safe. Kim took my hand. Her touch was firm and professional. My hands were a man's hands, big, a little calloused, with short, utilitarian nails. I'd never given them a second thought. But as she began to file and buff them, shaping them into a neat, rounded square, I watched, mesmerized. She was transforming these clumsy, functional things into something elegant. The most unnerving part was having to rest my hand in hers. It was an act of surrender, of trust. I was letting her perform this intimate, beautifying ritual on me, and it felt both profoundly strange and deeply calming. When she opened the bottle of polish, the pale pink looked even softer and more delicate. She painted the first stroke on my thumbnail, a perfect glossy stripe of color, and then another nail, and another. The feeling was nothing, just a cool liquid being brushed onto a non-feeling surface, but the visual impact was immense. My hands were no longer just my hands. They were adorned. They were decorated. The simple act of adding color had changed my perception of them entirely. I found myself flexing my fingers, watching how the light caught the glossy surface. When she was done with both hands, she had me place them under a small UV lamp to dry. I sat there, motionless, staring at my 10 perfectly painted pink nails. This small, seemingly insignificant detail felt enormous. A dress could be taken off, makeup could be washed away, but this would last for days. This would be there tomorrow morning when I woke up. It was a visible, lasting mark of the day's journey. Walking out of the salon, I was hyper-aware of my hands. I resisted the urge to hide them in my pockets. Instead, I let them swing at my sides. The fear was still there. A low hum of what if someone sees, but it was being drowned out by a powerful new feeling. It wasn't just acceptance anymore. It was a quiet, blossoming joy. The femininity I had been so terrified of didn't feel like a costume. It felt like something I had been searching for my entire life, a missing piece of myself clicking neatly into place. We didn't take a cab back to Sarah's apartment. She suggested we walk the few blocks, and to my own surprise, I agreed. The late afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows on the pavement. A gentle breeze lifted the soft strands of my new hair, brushing them against my cheek. It picked up the hem of my new jade green dress, making it sway and dance around my legs. The sensation was exhilarating. For the first time in my life, I wasn't striding or stomping. My gait had changed, softened. I was simply moving. I was acutely aware of my body in a way I had never been before. The light touch of the fabric, the subtle click of the modest heels Sarah had insisted I buy, the faint, sweet scent of the lip gloss I was wearing. I felt untethered, liberated. "It's like I've been wearing a suit of armor my whole life, and I never even knew it," I said, my voice quiet with wonder. "And now it's off, and I can finally feel the sun on my skin." Sarah smiled, bumping her shoulder gently against mine. "You seem lighter." "I am," I admitted. And then, the words came, unbidden, rising from a place so deep inside me I didn't know it existed. They felt as natural as breathing. If I were going to be someone new today, a new person, I think her name would be Alina. The name floated in the air between us, as shimmering and fragile as my confession in the bar last night. I hadn't planned to say it. I hadn't even thought it before that very second. It just appeared. It felt right. It tasted right on my tongue. Alina. Sarah stopped walking. She turned to face me, her expression full of a profound warmth that made my heart ache. She reached out and took my hand with its pale pink nails, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "It's a beautiful name," she said, her voice soft but sure. "Welcome, Alina." Hearing her say it, hearing her validate this new, fragile piece of my identity, was everything. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. It was gratitude and relief and a terrifying, soaring joy all rolled into one. I wasn't Joe in a dress anymore. In that moment, on that sun-drenched sidewalk, I was Alina. Back in the safety of Sarah's apartment, the adrenaline of the day began to fade, replaced by a quiet, buzzing energy while Sarah ordered pizza. I found myself drawn to the full-length mirror in her bedroom. I stood before it, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic beat for hours. I'd only seen myself in fragments: a haircut in a salon mirror, a dress in a fitting room, a face in a small compact, but now I was seeing the whole picture. There, in the reflection, stood a person I almost recognized, a tall, slender figure in a green dress. Soft, honey-streaked hair framed a face with large, dark eyes and gently colored lips. Elegant hands with pale pink nails rested at her sides. It was me, but it was also her. It was Alina. I touched my face, my fingers tracing the line of my jaw, which somehow looked softer. I ran a hand down the fabric of the dress, feeling it skim over my body. I turned, watching the way the skirt flared out. A slow, incredulous smile spread across my face. It wasn't a forced smile, not the one I use for photos or polite greetings. This was real. It reached my eyes, making them shine with a light I hadn't seen in them before. I pulled out my phone, my movements still slightly clumsy with the new length of my nails. I opened the camera app and turned it to face me. I hesitated for a second. Then I pressed the button. Click. I took another and another. I took dozens of photos, some smiling, some serious, some looking directly at the camera, others with my head tilted, a soft strand of hair falling across my face. I wasn't being vain. I was documenting a birth. I was gathering evidence that this person, this feeling, was real. I was terrified that I would wake up tomorrow and it would all have been a dream, that Alina would vanish and I would be left with only the ghost of this incredible, liberating feeling. Later that evening, sitting on Sarah's couch, eating pizza and watching a stupid movie, I kept glancing down at my hands, at the pink nails resting on my knee, a constant, gentle reminder. I felt a tremor of fear run through me when I thought about the future. What did this mean? Who was I now? Could I ever go back to being just Joe? The terrifying truth, which was settling into my bones with a strange sense of peace, was that I didn't want to. I didn't know what the path forward looked like, but for the first time in my entire life, I knew I couldn't go back. The armor was off, and I had no intention of ever putting it on again. I was scared, yes, but underneath the fear was a profound, unshakable happiness. I was Alina, and I was finally, truly, beginning to breathe. The first test came a week later. It was our regular Friday night get-together with our two closest friends, Mark and David. The thought of telling them sent a fresh wave of panic through me. These were guys I'd played basketball with, complained about work with, been one of the boys with for years. Sarah had offered to cancel, to give me more time, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. If this was real, it had to survive in the real world. I decided to meet them as Alina. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever done. I spent 2 hours getting ready, my hands shaking so badly I could barely apply my mascara. I chose a simple navy blue wrap dress and flat shoes, something I hoped looked approachable and not like a costume. When Sarah and I walked into the familiar pub, Mark and David were already at our usual table. They looked up, saw Sarah, and then their eyes slid over to me. There was a moment of pure, unadulterated confusion on their faces. They looked from me to Sarah and back again. "Hey guys," Sarah said, her voice casual, betraying none of the tension radiating from me. "This is Alina." I braced myself. Mark, always the jokester, opened his mouth, and I saw a dozen possible wisecracks flash in his eyes, but then he seemed to really look at me, at the nervous plea in my expression, and he closed it again. David, ever the thoughtful one, was the first to speak. "Alina," he said, testing the name. He gestured to the empty chair. "It's nice to meet you. Please, sit down." The conversation that followed was halting and awkward at first. I explained, my voice barely above a whisper, that I was the same person they'd always known as Joe. I told them this wasn't a phase or a joke, but something I was exploring about who I really was. I expected questions about surgery, about my sexuality, about a million things I didn't have answers to myself. Instead, after a long, tense silence, Mark just shrugged. "So does this mean you're going to start hogging the bathroom now?" he asked, a small, tentative smile on his face. It was a stupid joke, but it was his way of saying it was okay. The tension in my shoulders eased by a fraction. David was more direct. "Look, man, Alina," he corrected himself. "This is a lot to take in. But you're our friend. That hasn't changed. Just give us a minute to get our heads around it, okay?" It was better than I could have ever hoped for. It wasn't a parade with rainbow flags, but it was acceptance. It was a willingness to try. That night, as they slowly started directing questions to Alina instead of awkwardly avoiding my gaze, I felt another piece of the future click into place. The workplace was the next great mountain to climb. I worked as a graphic designer in a mid-sized, fairly progressive tech company, but office culture is its own beast. After several sleepless nights, I drafted an email with the help of Sarah and an online guide from a transgender advocacy group. It was short, professional, and to the point. It stated that I was a transgender woman, that I would be living and working as my authentic self from now on, and that my name was Alina and my pronouns were she, her. I ended by saying I was the same dedicated colleague I had always been and looked forward to continuing to work with everyone. My finger hovered over the send button for a full 10 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs. I finally squeezed my eyes shut and clicked it, sending it to my immediate boss and the head of HR. The moment it was gone, I felt a dizzying mix of terror and relief. There was no going back now. The response came faster than I expected. Within an hour, my boss, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, requested a brief video call. I accepted, my stomach churning. Her face popped up on my screen. She looked at me, taking in my appearance, and then she gave me a small professional smile. "Alina," she said, using my name without a hint of hesitation. "Thank you for letting us know. I just wanted to say that we support you completely. I've spoken with HR and will be updating your records. Let me know if there's anything you need from us to make this a smooth transition, or if anyone gives you any trouble. We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment." I was so overwhelmed I could only stammer a thank you. After the call, my HR representative sent a company-wide memo which I had pre-approved announcing my transition simply and factually. The replies started trickling in. A few were simply, "Congratulations, Alina," from colleagues. The head of my department sent a personal note saying, "Proud to have you on our team, Alina." There were no snide remarks, no invasive questions, just quiet, professional support on Monday. When I walked into the office, my new nameplate was already on my desk. Coming out was one thing. Understanding the whirlwind of emotions inside me was another. Sarah helped me find a therapist who specialized in gender identity issues. Her name was Dr. Evans, and in her calm, quiet office, I finally felt safe enough to unpack everything. I told her about the decades of shame, the giddy joy of that first day of transformation, and the persistent fear that I was making a huge mistake. She listened patiently, validating my feelings without ever telling me what to do. She helped me understand that my journey was my own, and there was no right or wrong way to go about it. It was Dr. Evans who first brought up the possibility of medical transition. "It's an option, Alina, if you feel it's right for you," she said gently. "Hormone replacement therapy can help align your physical body more closely with your internal identity." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. After months of therapy and deep soul-searching, I knew it was the next step I needed to take. I was referred to an endocrinologist, and after a series of consultations and blood tests, I held my first prescription in my hand. It was for estrogen patches and a testosterone blocker. The changes were incredibly subtle at first. I didn't wake up one day a different person, but over weeks and then months, I began to notice shifts. My skin started to feel softer, less rough. My sense of smell became more acute. The constant, low-level anger and agitation that had been a background noise my whole life began to quiet, replaced by a wider, more accessible range of emotions. I cried during a sad movie for the first time. Not tears of frustration, but of genuine empathy. My body began to change, too. Fat slowly redistributed, softening my waist and adding a slight curve to my hips. My facial features seemed to lose their sharpest edges. Each small change felt like a victory, a confirmation. It felt like my body was finally catching up to my soul. The last and highest hurdle was my family. I had been putting it off, terrified of their reaction. My parents were good people, but they were traditional. From a small town where people like me were punchlines, not their own children. I drove to their house on a Saturday, dressed in a conservative sweater and jeans, my makeup minimal. I sat them down in the living room where I'd grown up, surrounded by photos of a little boy who had never really existed. I told them everything. I cried, my mother cried, and my father just sat there, his face like stone. The initial reaction was what I had feared: confusion, disbelief, and a heartbreaking dose of denial. "This is just a phase, Joe," my dad said, his voice strained. "You're confused." "It's our fault." My mother wept. What did we do wrong? It was agonizing. Their words, born of fear and a lack of understanding, were like tiny needles in my heart. But I didn't get angry. Guided by my therapy sessions, I stayed calm. I told them I loved them, that I was the same person inside, and that this was about my happiness, my survival. I left them with some pamphlets from PFLAG that my therapist had given me. The next few months were strained. Our phone calls were stilted, filled with awkward silences. My dad refused to use my new name, but I was patient. I kept calling. I kept sending them pictures of my life, of me smiling with my friends. I kept gently correcting them when they used the wrong pronouns. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. It was my birthday, and a package arrived from them. Inside was a simple silver necklace with the letter A on it. There was a card. In my mother's familiar handwriting, it said, "We are trying to understand. We love you." And underneath, in my father's scratchy, less practiced script, were 3 words: "Happy birthday, Alina." I held the necklace to my chest and sobbed, not with sadness, but with a profound, earth-shattering sense of relief. The road ahead with them was still long, but for the first time, I knew we were finally walking in the same direction. A year can feel like a lifetime. The person I was 12 months ago that terrified, whispering man in a noisy bar felt like a character from a book I'd once read. He was a stranger to me now. My mornings had a new rhythm, a quiet ritual that brought me joy instead of dread. I would wake up, and for a fleeting second, the old habit of feeling wrong in my own skin would surface. But then I'd catch my reflection in the window or feel the softness of my own cheek, and I would remember I am Alina. The process of getting ready was no longer a frantic, terrifying experiment. It was an act of self-care and expression. Choosing what to wear was a daily delight. Would it be the flowing floral skirt that made me feel whimsical, or the sharp, tailored trousers and silk blouse that made me feel powerful and confident for a big meeting at work? My closet, once a monotonous landscape of denim, gray, and navy, was now a vibrant tapestry of colors and textures that reflected every facet of my personality. Doing my makeup was a meditative practice. The swirl of a blush brush on my cheek, the careful flick of an eyeliner pen, the swipe of a bold red lipstick on a day I needed courage. These were not acts of concealment, but of enhancement. I wasn't creating a mask. I was simply decorating the home I had finally learned to love. I walked differently. I no longer hunched my shoulders to minimize my presence. I stood tall, my steps measured and sure. I learned to accept compliments with a simple thank you instead of a flustered denial. I even learned to flirt a little, to meet a stranger's admiring glance with a small, confident smile of my own. My voice, with the help of a vocal coach, had found a new, softer pitch that felt more like my own. Life was no longer in black and white. I was living in vibrant, glorious color. To mark the 1-year anniversary of that fateful night, Sarah and I went back to the same bar. It was exactly the same: the purple lights, the sticky floors, the thumping bass, but I was entirely different. I wore a shimmering, knee-length cocktail dress and heels I could now walk in without wobbling. My hair, now longer, was styled in soft waves that brushed my shoulders. We sat at the very same spot at the counter. "Can you believe it's been a year?" I said, my voice filled with a marvel that still hadn't faded. Right here is where I thought my life was ending. It turns out it was just beginning." "I knew you had it in you," Sarah said, raising her gin and tonic. "I just helped you find the doorknob. You were the one brave enough to turn it and walk through." My friends, Mark and David, joined us a little later. They greeted me with easy hugs. "Looking sharp, Alina," Mark said with a grin. And there was no awkwardness, no hesitation in it. It was just a friend complimenting a friend. We spent the evening laughing and reminiscing. We talked about the cringeworthy first attempts at makeup, the time I almost broke my ankle in a pair of stilettos, the triumph of finding the perfect pair of jeans that actually fit my new curves. We weren't just remembering the hard parts. We were celebrating the entire, messy, beautiful journey. Looking around at the faces of my friends, my chosen family who had supported me without question, I felt a wave of gratitude so immense it almost brought tears to my eyes. The shame and fear that had defined my existence for so long were gone. In their place was a quiet, unshakable confidence and a deep, abiding peace. I had shed the ill-fitting costume of Joe and had stepped into the radiant skin of Alina. I was no longer a secret whispered in the dark. I was a declaration, spoken in the light. A few weeks after my anniversary, I posted a few photos from that celebratory night on social media. I was smiling, surrounded by my friends, looking genuinely, unequivocally happy. The next day, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a message request from a name I hadn't thought about in months, Maria, the hairstylist, the one with the pink hair and the warm, gap-toothed smile who had given me my very first affirming haircut. My heart did a little flutter. I opened the message. "Hey Alina, I saw your pictures. You look absolutely radiant. The longer hair really suits you. I hope this isn't too forward, but I was wondering if you might like to grab a coffee sometime as a friend. Of course, it's just really cool to see how you've blossomed." I read the message 3 times. The as a friend part seemed both like a genuine attempt to be respectful and a slightly nervous disclaimer. I smiled to myself. I remembered the feeling of her hands in my hair, her gentle, non-judgmental warmth. I typed back before I could second-guess myself. "I'd love that. Maria, thank you. How's Thursday?" We met at a cozy little coffee shop downtown. Maria was even more striking in person than I remembered today. Her hair was a pastel lavender, and she wore a vintage band t-shirt and ripped jeans, an effortlessly cool look that made my carefully chosen floral blouse and cardigan feel a bit prim. The conversation was easy, flowing naturally from small talk about work and the city to my journey over the past year. She was an incredible listener, asking thoughtful questions that showed she was genuinely curious, not just nosy. "It must have been so terrifying," she said at one point, her brown eyes full of empathy, "to take that first step." "It was," I admitted, "but staying where I was felt a lot scarier in the long run." As we talked, I noticed the little things, the way she would lean in slightly when I was speaking, the way her hand brushed against mine when she reached for the sugar. At one point, she laughed at something I said, and she put her hand on my forearm for just a second. The touch was light, friendly, but it sent a little jolt of electricity up my arm. I felt my cheeks grow warm, and for the first time, it wasn't a blush of shame or embarrassment, but one of simple, pleasant attraction. The air between us felt charged with a gentle, unspoken possibility. A few days later, she asked me to dinner. We went to a beautiful restaurant with a patio overlooking the river. The city lights sparkled on the dark water, and a cool evening breeze rustled the leaves in the trees overhead. This time, there was no pretense of just as friends. It felt, unmistakably, like a date. We talked for hours, sharing stories about our childhoods, our dreams, our heartbreaks. I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't with anyone before, telling her not just about my transition, but about who I was deep down, my love for old movies, my terrible habit of killing houseplants, my secret ambition to write a novel. She listened to all of it, her gaze never wavering. She made me feel interesting. She made me feel seen. As we were getting ready to leave, a gust of wind blew a strand of my hair across my face, sticking to my lip gloss. Before I could move, Maria reached across the small table, her expression impossibly tender. With the lightest touch, she carefully tucked the stray strand behind my ear, her fingers lingering for a fraction of a second against my cheek. The world seemed to slow down. The distance between us suddenly felt electric and intimate. I could smell the faint, spicy scent of her perfume. My breath hitched in my throat. We were no longer just two people sharing a meal. We were two people on the verge of something new and incredibly exciting. She walked me home. Under the warm glow of a street lamp just outside my apartment building, we stopped. The comfortable silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we hadn't yet said. She was the one who broke it. She reached out and took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. Her hand was warm and strong. "You know, Alina," she said, her voice soft, "you are one of the most beautiful people I've ever met, and I don't just mean on the outside." My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I couldn't find my voice, so I just smiled, a real, shaky, hopeful smile. She took that as her invitation. She took a small step closer, her other hand coming up to gently cup my jaw. Her thumb stroked my cheek, right where her fingers had been just a few hours before. Her eyes searched mine. Asking a silent question, I gave the slightest nod, a tremor of consent. She leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a demanding, passionate kiss. It was gentle, soft, and full of a quiet reverence. It was a kiss of acceptance, of admiration. It tasted of the wine we had had with dinner and the promise of a new beginning. In that single perfect moment, all the pain and fear of the last year, of my entire life, melted away. I was no longer just the person who had survived. I was Alina, a woman, whole and happy, a woman in love, and this was not an ending. This was the first, beautiful page of the rest of my life.